नमस्कार, कृत्या-सुर संगम में आप सबका स्वागत है। आज ये हमारा पहला संस्करण है और हम अभय रुस्तम सोपोरी जी का बहुत बहुत उनके आभारी हैं कि वे आज अपने सुर संगम को लेकर यहाँ पर आए हैं। और अशरफ अबुल तो हमारे मित्र हैं जो हमारे साथ हमेशा की तरह उपस्थित हैं। Dear friends, welcome you to Sur Sangam of Kritya. This is the first issue of Sur Sangam, and I am grateful to Abhay Rustum Sopori, who is a Ustad, and he is a prominent musician, prominent musician, not only musician, he is, I think, a singer and everything. And it's not easy to get him. So I thank to Agni Shekhar also, that because of him, I could invite him. Ashraf Aboul is our friend. He's a part of Kritya, and he is always ready when there is something important. I was very much interested in this program when I saw a program by Ashraf of a music by Egyptian singer or musician, and then I wanted to show them that yes, in our Indian culture, in India also, there are many beautiful instruments played by classical and folk musicians or singers or many artists. So that is how this is the first issue. We came here, and I welcome you again. Now I leave my place for Ashraf and Abhay. Thank you very much, Ashraf and.
Thank you, Rati and Abhay. I am delighted to be with you and with fans of music, special music, and that kind of traditional instrument with that rich history, of course. And because that is rich, so the family treating this instrument is also very rich with its tradition. And of course, not everyone read about you at the very beginning. So I believe it is good to introduce you for everyone who is watching this interview for the first time with you. So at the beginning, I am reading a lot about this kind of family, Santoor family, and how could be like a marathon of music. You are getting the torch from one generation to another. The grandfather who was the father of music in Jammu and Kashmir, the father himself with all that credited for his history, and you with that kind of glamour and, let us say, the awards deserved you are getting day after day. So let me start with this kind of marathon in the family, the Santoor family.
Hello, Mr. Ashraf. It's such a pleasure to speak to you today. And a special thanks to Ratiji and Dr. Agni Shekhar as well for making this happen. We basically, when we talk about Santoor, it's one of the ancient most instruments of our country. We find Santoor resembling instruments in many parts of the world. Even towards Egyptian side, we have resembling instruments. Some people have this notion that this instrument actually came during the influence of Persian music in India, and that's when Santoor came to Kashmir. But Santoor has the history which goes back centuries before the Persian influence came to Kashmir. So I'll give you a little description about Santoor. The ancient name for this instrument is Shatatantri Veena, which is a Sanskrit terminology. It means Shatatantri, 100 strings, and Veena. So any instrument with strings used to be called as Veena, and this is the Veena with 100 strings called as the Shatatantri Veena. We have the references of this instrument, and we go back to the 3rd century, also 4th century, where we find references of this instrument as Shatatantri Veena. And later the name got changed to Santoor, and it's now popular as Santoor, more popular as Santoor rather than Shatatantri Veena. In our family, we have this beautiful blend of the Shaivite culture of Kashmir. I'm sorry. And also the beautiful Sufi culture. So this beautiful blend of Shaivism, Sufism, together with the Indian classical music, it's the only musical family, as we call it as Gharana in our system, uh, in Indian music, where we have the combination of Shaivism, Sufism, and Hindustani classical music. Now, Santoor it's a classical instrument. It's not a folk instrument of Kashmir, whereas the resembling instruments in other parts of the world, uh, they have adapted it into the folk cultures of those areas. But uh, in India, we have classical, we have folk, and folk instruments are totally different. Majorly, it's too complicated to be handled in a folk culture, because essentially in the folk culture, you have instruments which can be played in the fields during the ceremonies. So we have the bowing instruments, like the bow instrument, we have sarangi, we have rabab in Kashmir, we have tumbak, which is very common between the Central Asian side. Even the instrument is there in Egypt as well. So we have tumbak, and then we have the clay pot, which we call as matka, or the note in Kashmiri language. So those are the folk instruments. Then we have classical instruments of Kashmir. So we have santoor. There is another string instrument, what we call as setar, and it's very similar to Indian sitar. And then we have Saze Kashmir. It's a instrument which is played with a bow. And then we used to have a percussion instrument called as vasool, which is not no longer there. It's an extinct instrument. I'm trying to revive it, but then now it's replaced with tabla. So this is majorly the difference between the folk instruments and the classical instruments of Kashmir. And in our
But yeah, but let me ask you, uh, listening to you differentiating between the folk and the classical, it means that classical needs some sort of a study, whether it is basic study or deep study.
Certainly. See, in the folk culture, which is again an oral structure, oral tradition, where there are ceremonies attached, there are songs which are attached to ceremonies. It could be the birth of a child, it could be the wedding ceremony, and essentially folk culture is always part of the wedding ceremonies. So both good moments and as well as some unfortunate sad incidents, like somebody has passed away in a family. So the music is also dedicated for those kind of ceremonies also, wherein
Yeah.
you do the rituals for the person who has passed away. But when it comes to the classical music, there is a defined system. There are certain rules. In folk culture, we have the melodies, and you can always experiment with the melodies. But when it comes to the classical form, you can experiment, but you have to be within the boundary of that discipline which has been given to you. Now, say for example, if I play a small structure, this would be little folk kind of a structure in Kashmir. Now, since the frame is such that the instrument is not actually visible, now let me first actually show the instrument to our
Yes.
viewers, those who have joined us. See, this is the instrument. This is the santoor, and this has 100 strings. And these are the elevated posts which we see here. These are the bridges on which the strings go. And I also have a small god beneath, which is called a tumba. It's right here. So this has two advantages. One, it supports the posture in which I sit. It's called Shri Asana. It's a creation of my father. And the second is the balancing of the higher and the lower octave. We play it with kalam. We call it kasht in Kashmiri language. A folk structure would be like this. Something like this.
Yes.
But when it comes to the Sufiana system of Kashmir, now Sufiana system is like this, in which actually I started the earlier structure. It's played along with the vocal system.
Yeah.
So one of the compositions, it's written by Laleshwari, one of the great Shaivite saints, and of course Sufi as well. Shiv chui thali thali roza, moza nandai. Rukai chuk pan parza, soi chai sahibo Now, essentially, it's a balance of the right and the left hand, and it's striking mode. But when it comes to Indian classical music, the entire system changes. We'll discuss the Indian classical music system later. So here the structure is basically kind of defined. They have been set by the masters earlier. We can add something new to that, but the scale would be defined, the scale would be set, and we cannot make changes on the on in that particular scale. In our family, it's a family which is 300-year-old legacy, and one after another musician has contributed to the development of santoor. And finally, when my father took santoor from the traditional Kashmiri santoor, he got and uh, took it to the stage of Indian classical music. He was 5 years old when he gave his first public performance as a small child in Kashmir in 1953. And then the first radio broadcast of the of my father. That was in 1954, and that's the journey of Indian classical santoor. In Indian classical music, Mr. Ashraf, we if we simply say, it doesn't convey anything. So there are patterns in which we have to
There should be an answer to
use
that.
their element. So, like, I've tuned this to one of the ragas, which is very common worldwide, this particular structure, this particular scale. In Indian music, Indian classical music, it's very common raga, essentially from the south of India, which is called Carnatic music. And it has been adapted in the northern system, and it's called Rag Girvani. So I'll just play a little initial part of the recital that we play. It's called Alap. It doesn't have any rhythmic accompaniment, and it's like exposition of the raga. You explore each note, just a couple of minutes of how we do the uh, elaboration of this
You will
raga.
enjoy it.
Yeah. Essentially, it has to produce the vocal system. So if I'm singing, so vocalist would put it as Now, these are the things which are very important in Indian classical music, that the continuity of the note, the joining of the notes, there shouldn't be too much of gap there. If there is gap, then it has to be with a purpose. It just cannot be because of some limitation. And even if we say the stress that we have on particular notes, what we call as gamak. So what I was just doing, this is basically called as meaned, wherein we press the string, and it's by the pressure technique, very special of my father's style. So I'm actually pressing a string, and that's how I generate the note.
I see.
And if I say ah, ah, so this is primarily the difference of playing between the Sufiana system and the classical system. And folk is, of course, something not on the Santoor. We can always take a folk melody and play that, but it's not part of the folk culture. And it has always retained that beautiful stature of a classical instrument. Uh, until now, it remains so.
Uh, yeah, but let me tell you a little secret before we continuing this interview. That little secret is about Rati herself. You know, she once wrote that she is regretted that she stopped learning Santoor. It means like Egyptian houses, many are bringing musicians to teach their daughters music with some instrument like violin, like piano, and so on. So, is this happening also in India that a teacher of music or a musician come to teach music to new generation?
There is a mistake, Ashraf. I wrote that I regret that I stopped learning sitar. Yes, sitar was taught to girls. Very common, especially in our community. I belong to a special community, but it is santoor. Sitar has only 7 strings. They are handling 100 strings.
I see. Yeah, that's as I say, 100. So how can this be taught?
Yeah.
But regarding this new generation, you are talking about the youth. How could this instrument be transferred to the young generation or to the youth generation?
See, it's very important that we pass on this legacy from one generation to the another. Otherwise, any art form will simply die. In India, the traditional system of teaching, when we talk about be it spirituality or music or any creative art like performing art like dance,
Art,
any other
paint.
field. So the system of teaching is called Guru Shishya Parampara, which is the teacher student tradition. Essentially, an oral tradition in which the student sits with the teacher, the Guru, and the Guru teaches the particular style or the genre of music, whatever the Guru is into and the student wants to learn. This system is very beautiful because in Indian classical music, even in Sufiana music, things have been written. There are books which talk about music. There are books which talk about ragas. If I talk about Indian classical music, we find thousands of books available. They tell us what the raga is, but they cannot teach you the interpretation of that raga. For that raga, for that interpretation, you have to be with your guru. And it's not one class or two classes or three classes. It's years of spending time with your teacher, with your guru, and trying to analyze how your teacher has understood that particular raga and interpreted it with his thoughts, put in his experience, his techniques, combined it with what he learned or she learned from the ancestors, and then combining something new, offering it to the new generation, and this circle keeps on moving forward. There are teachers who come on regular basis, not in the typical guru shishya parampara, this tradition, and they come and teach, but that teaching is like a classroom teaching wherein a student learns very basics of the classical system. They might teach a raga, they might teach a particular composition, but they won't be part of any particular style of representation of that raga or music. For that style, you have to be with a guru whom will place a step ahead of a regular teacher. A teacher will guide you for a couple of compositions, but guru will give you the entire interpretation of the system. And it only happens when we spend time. At times there are students who find it too difficult to spend so much of time in learning, but the fact is, unless we give time to any creative art, it doesn't give the fruits. So you have to have that patience. And that's, I think, what's the essential purpose also of music. It really builds your patience. It gives you that feel of belongingness with your creative art. And once you spend time, when you spend years with your guru, I'm sure any person will develop good amount of patience.
Yes, it's like a fisherman or a hunter. He cannot get what he wants and without patience. And this could be telling me about your academy or your project about this academy for Santoor. And can this academy be an alternative for guru or teacher in house?
Well, when there is an academy which is run by a performing musician, so the interpretations remains the same, because it would be the guru who will essentially be teaching. After the guru, immediate next teacher would be the disciple of that particular guru. So in our music academy, if somebody wants to learn santoor, if my father is not available on a particular date, so I'll be sitting with the student. If I'm not available, some senior student of my father would be teaching the newcomers. So the stream of your thought is the same. But in a regular school, what happens if somebody goes, he learns vocal music? So the vocal teacher will have his own interpretation, which he would have learned. And then finally, if you learn some other instrument, you would have a different teacher. The basic difference between a normal teacher and between a Guru Shishya Parampara system or a regular school and a Guru Shishya Parampara tradition school is that here certain discipline that has been set by the masters. The interpretation of the raga has been set by the masters, which has been worked by the generations which have come. And if there is somebody who feels that something new can be created, it's part of the old system. Like in the case of my father, our lineage is Sopori Sufiana Gharana. Gharana is the music school of thought. So the Soporis, Sufiana Gharana of music, my father created a new style of playing santoor, and we call that Sopori Baj. Baj means style. So Sopori style of playing santoor. But my Gharana doesn't change. My Gharana is still the same, because the compositions which I have learned, they are of my ancestors. Like my grandfather taught me a composition. I'll sing a couple of lines of that for you. Now
Yes.
it's very different composition. परवरदिगार तू, परवरदिगार तू. It says Parvardigar too, which is you are the Almighty, you are the Creator, you are the ultimate energy. Parvardigar tu, Parvardigar, paak zat pe niyaz tu, Parvardigar tu. So here the composition, Parvardigaratu, that remains the same, but the style of presenting that particular composition is totally different, and that is the style which my father has created. So even in a particular stream, in a particular school of music, you can have something which is absolutely new, absolutely fresh, and that is called a style. But if it's linked to a particular school of thought, then it's Guru Shishya Parampara. If it's a regular teaching, then it's not part of that particular style.
So there is a mainstream or a main river. There is a Ganga, but all small rivers are going to rest on that main river.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can say the Guru Shishya Parampara system is like a river where various tributaries come and mix into the river.
Yeah.
And a regular teaching would be like a pond somewhere. It has little water in it, and that's the only scope of that particular pond. So here also, the scope of a regular teacher is very limited. You cannot expect something miraculously different happening from a regular teacher, unless that teacher is following a particular style, a particular school of thought.
Yeah. And I read also, and I saw many performances that is shifting this Santoor from local performance to some sort of international performance with, let us say, global orchestra. How was this journey? How was this shift?
See, I have, apart from classical, Indian classical music, I have learned the Sufi music of Kashmir. I have learned compositions. My father gave me detailed uh, knowledge of Western classical music. So I have been conducting orchestras and ensembles. In fact, in my generation, I am the only one in India who conducts orchestras and folk ensembles. And folk ensembles are something which are absolutely rare, and only my father and I have been doing that in India. So we have a complete symphonic orchestra combining with local folk musicians, and we present this particular orchestra. It's absolutely something which is brilliant musically. And one of the major concerts which we had was with the legendary maestro, Mr. Zubin Mehta, wherein he conducted my composition, which I called as Haftrang, which was like a tribute to Kashmir. And I also co-conducted with him. So we had the Bavarian State Orchestra of Germany performing the composition along with my folk musicians from Kashmir. So on one side we had the violins, violas, cellos, the string section. We had the brass section. We had the woodwinds, and on the other side we had the Kashmiri rabab. We had santoor. We had Kashmiri sarangi. We had tumbaknari. We had matka. So absolutely beautiful collaboration. I think what collaborations really do is just enhance your learning as a musician. You get to learn so much while doing collaborations. When I collaborated as a musician, now this was as a composer and as a
I see.
conductor, but when I collaborated with some of the musicians, like I did a fusion concert with uh, Iranian Santoor player, very senior Santoor player, a very legendary name, uh, Dr. Shagafi, Daria Shagafi. And that was the Persian music together with Indian classical music and Kashmiri music. When I collaborated with Vienna Boys Orchestra, Vienna Boys Choral Group from Austria, so we exchanged our music. I played some of their pieces, they played my Kashmiri pieces, some Tarana composition of my great grandfather, and we exchange musically our thoughts, our expressions, and you really get to learn a lot when you do. The discipline of other music forms, the expansion and the beauty of their music, it's something beautiful and brilliant. I think if it's something which is meaningful, which means basically you know what you are doing, it shouldn't happen that you sit on the stage and you have no idea about each other, and you just fix a particular
No.
scale and two musicians are playing two different solos. But when you collaborate, you do the fusion. I think that is something which really creates something beautiful for the musicians and also for the listeners.
Yeah, I agree, and I also agree that music is that alphabet that everyone can speak without translation. If someone was passing by me, listening to your singing and performance, he would think that this is some sort of Arabian Nights, some sort of Sufi Arabic singer and musicians. So such a kind of similarity, it means the soul is there and it is distributed along cultures. But you are talking somewhere about the characteristic of that instrument or that culture. So how do you see that characteristics?
I think the foremost thing is that there has to be some very good understanding between the two musicians. Like I remember, my father says that he had, because I haven't been to Egypt, unfortunately, till now. Really look forward to being there sometime.
I'll be
It's
waiting for your
wonderful.
next visit.
Yeah. So my father has been to Egypt, I think in early 70s or
I see.
so, somewhere around that time, and he had collaborations there with the Egyptian musicians as well. So he had Egyptian instrumentalists, the rhythmists. I think the main thing is that you understand each other, you understand the interpretation of each other, how you can take the musical expressions of each other and build a composition on that and take it further, something which listeners haven't heard earlier and they can also enjoy. At the end of the day, we are on stage performing for the audience, and we have to give the audience also something new. It's our duty to provide them something new, offer them something new in our music, rather than something which has been experimented for years together. And basis of that is understanding of each other as a person, as musicians, and also understanding of music of each other. If I'm collaborating with a musician from a different country, I think it would be better if I study a little bit about the culture of that area. I personally always do that. That's what my father has taught me. That even in within the country, if I'm being a Kashmiri, if I'm composing something which is from south of India, let me read about the culture of that particular folk, about that particular area, what is the everything about that particular area, what people eat, what people wear, so that
Yeah.
you can adjust into that particular scenario. You can visualize this scenario of for what you are composing or what you are playing, and then be into that system, at least in your thoughts.
Yeah, I am asking you now about this kind of relationship between a musician and a writer of his songs. And it could be sometimes that the musician is writing for himself because he is that kind of cultural man to understand maybe more than the writer to write for himself. So you tell me about such relationship between you and your writer, or how do you compose your words?
Well, you rightly said, at times musician will land up writing himself. I also write at times, but I'm not a writer. I may write a poem, but I'm not a poet. I have my a website. I have put a couple of my poems out there, but I'm not at all a poet. There could be some flaw in the language as well, but it's about the expression. It's the expression which I've thought, and that's what makes the difference. When I write, it's all dwelled into the musical part of it. And when I compose for somebody else, then I have to understand what the writer would have written or the poet would have written. Here I know what the music part is, and then I'm writing as part of the music. My music and my writing will go together. But when it's a different writer, he'll write something. I need to understand what he has written and then understand what he could have thought. If he had been a musician, what would he compose? That's the job of a composer.
I see, I see. But you mentioned writing and poetry. So listening to you talking about this rich history of the instrument, this kind of characteristic, this history of people who made this legacy, can this be registered or it is enough to be online available? How about writing these in books, like a school book for those who are coming to the academy? I mean, more than documenting it by performance, but also by writing.
I'm actually doing that. I'm in midway of my thesis, completing my thesis. It's one of my major chapters is Santoor, and
I see.
in a way, I'm writing a new cultural history of Kashmir through my thesis. Because what has happened that over the centuries, the cultural history of Kashmir has been wrongly put by the writers. There have been various reasons for that, but finally, what came was just like, say, for example, that Santoor is not a Kashmiri instrument. So, such kind of things have been written in the history. So now my thesis actually established the fact that if I'm saying that this is a Kashmiri instrument, how it is a Kashmiri instrument, what are the basis of my saying that this instrument belongs to Kashmir. So this connection of Shaivism with Santoor and then Sufism and now the Indian classical music, it all features in my thesis, which will eventually come in a book form, and it will go to print as well. I plan to finish it this year itself, and hopefully next year onwards,
Yeah.
the
So
research scholars, the students
next
will
year we
have
will call you Professor Abhay. Next year.
some. I'll still love when you'll call me Abhay. Yeah, I'll still love that.
Yeah. And I mean, before continuing, let us listen to music because actually, music is telling more than can words do.
Absolutely. I'll play a composition. It's a very traditional composition in 12 beat cycle. I'll sing it as well. Small.
It's wonderful. And we agree that it is an art. Music is an art, but it is also industry. So what does this industry need to be developed? I mean, many industries could be disappearing or vanished, but when it is rich industry, we need to develop it. So what does it need to develop Santoor industry music?
Well, see, it's very important for any art form to grow. You need little patronage. It's absolutely important. If we talk about the ancient times, all creative art forms, they had the patronage of the rulers, the kings. Later on, in the modern era, the big companies, the industries, they started supporting. The government had its as part of its policy all around the world. They had this area in which they had uh, various means of patronage for music and other performing arts. When we talk about industry, it has various aspects. It has the music companies which release music albums. Mostly they are all selfish, so I really don't love working with them. Then
Because you are belonging to a family which is selfless, as I read it.
my problem with music company is that I tell them, please explain me how you can have the right on my creative work, and I'll give you everything. uh, but it's not right, actually. Now there are rules, the royalty rules and the trademark for music compositions and all. They have now come into place quite a lot, to some extent. But earlier, music companies would simply take away the rights, and musicians were not objecting to that, I think, all around the world. But I have problem with that. I better sell my albums myself rather than giving it to the company, because somewhere it has to be stopped. You cannot let the wrong thing keep on happening. Earlier nobody thought about it, but when I thought about it, I am a person who fights on certain issues. I don't take weapons in my hands, but I because I have Santoor in my hands, but I don't let something which is not right go further. It's always been my practice that even when I talk about music, if I find that a particular group of musicians are not getting a proper stage, say younger musicians are not getting proper stage, I'll work for that. So that is not something which is part of my musician side, but it's part of my personality. I love doing things for the music community, for my society, for my country, basically for the entire music world. So that is also part of this. That work is also part of the music industry. We are basically trying to say that we want to create a platform, whether we call it music industry or whatever, wherein everybody has his space and they can come and display their talent, they can perform without anybody interfering in kind of, whether that is some kind of bias, whether that is some kind of personal agendas or something. Let's create a wonderful environment for music. If we are able to do that, we'll have a good music industry.
But in this industry, could movies and film industry help in this way, or they are also like companies?
Well, film industry is altogether different. It's commercial music. Commercial music is always different from the traditional arts. Because the movie in India, we have long movies. We have 2.5 hours to 3 hours movies because we have lots of songs in it. But movies which are made outside India essentially are of 1.5 hours to 2 hours maximum. Mostly, the bulk of that. Our recital is more than that. So traditional arts and commercial music basically don't go together. But yes, through movies, what can be done is that which have been done so many times. And recently, when I gave music for this movie which got released earlier this year, called Shikara. So that was made on the center line of the story was Kashmir, and the 1990 incident in Kashmir. So I had the full freedom by the director, Mr. Vidhu Vinod Chopra, that I could explore the Kashmir in my music. And I had the full freedom to use any of the instruments, uh, be it Santoor or Rabab. In fact, he was so particular that we should bring out the essence of Kashmir into the, into the movie. And I'm so happy to have worked, in the Indian film industry, uh, and brought the essence of Kashmiri music and Kashmiri culture through my music into the mainstream cinema. But that really happens very rarely. It's not something which happens in every movie. It's commercial movie. It could be an item song. It could be anything. Now a
Yes.
classical musician won't play a item song, even if I compose it as a composer, but I won't play it on my instrument. So there is
Does
always a difference.
yeah. Does TV channel or televisions give you and the instrument the chance to be in on TV programs? This could be held
Of
because
course.
of millions of watchers.
In India, we have the national channel by the which is run by the government. Actually, it's called Doordarshan. It's the national television. National television has various channels which they have. They have a news channel. They have a regular channel in which various soap serials and all those come, and they also have a dedicated channel in which they have classical music going on. There is a private channel also which features lots of classical music. Uh, they have the ministry also has government of India also has have the national broadcasting radio system. So through All India Radio, primarily it is for classical and traditional music. So there is lots of scope in India, and I think even outside India, music has, especially European companies, European nations, they
Yes.
have a lot. They do a lot in terms of their culture. But as you said earlier, in the films, we have Santoor as part of film industry as it is Santoor. Santoor has been used quite a lot in the films also. But when it comes to highlighting your classical music, I think it has been done more earlier. The earlier films, the music was based on classical music. The composers were classically trained. Now the scenario has changed. The music has changed. It's more of electronic music. It has its own beauty, but it's little different from the classical form.
Yeah. Before we invite you to give us some sort of a goodbye piece of music, let us listen to you portraying the future. How do you see the future regarding the Santoor?
Well, the future of Santoor is absolutely bright with the grace of God. The kind of work which my father essentially has done to bring this Santoor uh, from the stature of a regional instrument, even though it was classical, but it was confined to a region. From that to a platform where it's now open, the we can play anything. There's hardly anything which a vocalist can sing and we cannot produce on the instrument. That's the level of instrument which has been created with all the innovations which my father has done. I have also done little bit some creations. My sound is very different from my father's Santoor. So lots of young children are learning Santoor. Many of my father's disciples, and otherwise also other Santoor players also in this country. Everybody is doing pretty well, and everybody is playing. And Santoor really has. It's, I think, one of the only ancient instruments, I would say, in the world which is so popular. And especially if we talk about India, it's one of the most popular instruments. Yes, it's technically little complicated. One has to tune 100 strings before playing it, so you have to be musically sound to play this instrument. But still, we have musicians who are coming up, children coming up and learning. The girls are learning. There are many female performers right now who are learning under my father and me, and the future really looks bright.
Abhay, I will be grateful if you present your music without any disturbance. We both will come out, and our audience are waiting for you. Ashraf,
Sure.
you have wonderful questions, and we will
Thank
go
you.
down now.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Abhay.
much. Thank you, Mr. Ashraf. It was such a pleasure speaking to you. I'll play a small piece. I think, say 5 minutes or so. Would that be okay?
More than you can go for any because there is time. Whatever you do, please. We want to hear your music, your magic. So 10 minutes,
I'll play
20
for a
minutes,
couple
5
of.
minutes, whatever. 20 minutes,
Okay.
30 minutes. We don't.
Okay.
We are
I'll play
really.
for some
Yeah.
10 odd minutes. I'll play.
Thank.
Yeah.
बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत ही आनंद आ गया। बिल्कुल जैसे कहते थे कि हम लोगों के लिए, हम बचपन से कश्मीर एक बहुत देव स्थान जैसा था हमारे जमाने में। मेरी आयु के हिसाब से मैं आपके पिता की उम्र की होगी शायद, तो हमारी आयु में कश्मीर एक तरह से देव स्थान था। कश्मीर जाना एक तरह से हमारे लिए पूजा के समान था। और ये जो संगीत है ये पूजा जैसा ही लगता है। इसकी जो 100 तरंगे हैं, वो 100 नाड़ियां हैं, वो बिल्कुल अभिभूत कर देती हैं। तो अशरफ अबोल ने अपने को डिस्कनेक्ट जरूर किया है, लेकिन वो आपको सुन रहे थे। और क्योंकि उनको शायद वो अपने स्टूडियो से नहीं बोल रहे थे, तभी उनकी लाइट वगैरह की प्रॉब्लम है, वो कहीं बाहर थे। ही इज वेरी बिजी पर्सन, सो दैट इज व्हाई आई स्टार्टेड स्पीकिंग इन हिंदी, की वो तो अभी है नहीं, तो अभी हिंदी में हम बोलते हैं। तो अशरफ ने अभी बोला है कि वो आपके बारे में प्रिंट पत्रिका में लिखेंगे। आपका फिर से ये इसी इंटरव्यू के कारण और भी आपसे कम्युनिकेट करके वो करेंगे। तो ये एक्चुअली ये आपने जो कुछ बातें कही कि आपको कश्मीर का इतिहास लिखना चाहिए, मैं भी कहूंगी, क्योंकि मैं इसी तरह का कल्चर इतिहास में बात करती हूँ, लिखती नहीं हूँ मैं। और अग्निशेखर से मेरी बात हुई है कि आप बहुत गलत पढ़ रहे हैं और बहुत गलत समझ रहे हैं। जो भी कुछ हुए आप सिर्फ है ना, आप पुराणों से समझ रहे हैं। और मैं उनको बार बार कहती हूँ कि आप इसको फिर से लिखिए। तो इसके बारे में भी हमको फिर से लिखना पड़ेगा। और ये जो कम्युनिकेशन है कि वहां से आया, हर चीज बाहर से आ गई, तो भाई हम लोग यहाँ पर क्या गूंगे बहरे या बिना संगीत या बिना उसके थे? यहाँ पे कुछ तो थे ना लोग, तभी तो कोई बाहर से आया। तो इस तरह की समस्या है। चलिए हम उसके बारे में बात करेंगे। आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत बहुत आभार। आप आए और एक उस्ताद हैं आप, तो आपका आदर बनता है हमारी तरफ से।
बड़ों का आशीर्वाद है।
हाँ, और मैं आपकी बहुत आभारी हूँ कि आपने हमारे कृत्या को सुरमय कर दिया। हम बहुत बहुत आभारी हैं। धन्यवाद।
नमस्कार।
नमस्कार।